Here we go. It's about, we always talk about how Iran started this war, but this guy talks about more the oil interests behind the Iran war. And that's the U.S. side of the equation. So I thought this would be a very interesting video to look at.
It's a general question, but mainly focusing on the latest developments now. Because there's a lot of moving pieces. On one side, you've got J.D. Vance saying this is a reset for the relations between the U.S. and Iran. He just made that statement about an hour ago. On the other side, you've got Israeli media, N12, whatever it's called, and the other one, I-24, I think, saying that, I-24 and Khan, sorry, saying that Israeli officials are preparing for a resumption of the war, which I think is more likely than not. And they're fully coordinated with Washington. Israeli officials believe strikes on Iran could begin within hours. Oh, sorry, that's before. They thought it was going to begin within hours, and they were surprised by the announcement by Trump, so they were expecting to begin the war.
I will say that Saudi Arabia has a very important religious event happening right now. Pilgrims from around the world visiting Saudi Arabia at this moment. So I think Saudi Arabia doesn't want the war resuming this week. Absolutely not. And Saudi Arabia is crucial to any campaign against Iran. And so I'm now on the situation that at least for this week, the risk of escalation is lower on the Iran side of things.
And now they still think the war is more likely. This according to Khan News. I-24 saying Israeli officials estimate Trump will eventually move forward with a strike on Iran, despite the mixed signals. And they said Netanyahu and Trump remain in full coordination. Mixed messages, mixed signals. I think Trump wants to get out of this. I think Israel's trying to make sure he doesn't. What's your analysis of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole question, like the age-old question, like who is running the show? Are the Israelis running the Americans, or is the other way around? And, I went back and I tried to look at, like, what are the people in the region saying? Like, for example, what is Nasrallah, who is leading the fight in Lebanon on the front lines, what does he think, right? Like, 'cause he's obviously got to know. And what does Khamenei think, right? I mean, both of them were killed by Israel and the United States in the last year and a half. So, like, it's even more relevant than before. And, the line that they have had in the resistance, whether we're talking about Arab or Persian or Muslim or like secularist, Marxist, it's been consistent over the last 80 years that it's the Americans that are running Israel, that Israel is a project of Western corporations or Western geopolitics. And, it depends.
I agree with that overall long term, yes. That the United States was a way to project its power in the Middle East, and they used Israel for that purpose. I will say that it's not absolute control, though. It works both ways. Israel is also its own interest. The Zionists are a thing, and it's more like an alliance between the deep state and the Zionists than it is control. So this is three groups here. There is the U.S. deep state, and he's going to talk about the oil interests and everything, like the deep state interests. Then there's the actual presidency, Trump, and I think the Israel and Zionists. And Israel does have huge influence over U.S. politics, but the U.S. deep state has a huge influence over Israel. Deep state isn't democratic. It has its own interests.
Depends how deep you want to go on this answer, but after the investigation,
can you go deeper on that statement? Yeah, please. Because everyone says Israel runs the US. I think Israel, just to let you know my position, I think Israel influences the US significantly, but I don't think they run the US, and I think it goes both ways depending when and who.
Exactly. I agree that, like, that it's a symbiotic relationship, but
yes,
at the end of the day,
symbiotic, an alliance, exactly.
The most obvious answer is usually the correct one. These are American bombs. They were not made in, Taiwan or in Zimbabwe. They came from factories in the United States. They were handed to Israel by American diplomats using American diplomatic cover. It's American media that justify this relationship with Israel. We should stop infantilizing Americans. Americans are not children. They are full-grown adults. They are a superpower.
And yes, Israel has a lot of influence over United States politics through its AIPAC and whatnot. But it doesn't control U.S. media. That's the deep state that controls U.S. media, the U.S. deep state. And the fact that U.S. media is pro-Israel is because there's an alliance between the U.S. deep state and Israel.
You could even argue a hyperpower, or they were at least, for the last couple of decades. Infantilizing them like they have no agency is, for me, this is a very clear attempt to kind of whitewash American history. And we have to remember the United States has been at war most of its existence, right? There was no Israel forcing them to, commit genocide against Native Americans, or to invade Mexico, or to drop bombs on Japan, nuclear weapons on Japan. And we can also look at Korea, we can look at Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. There are all these theaters of war across the planet, and war is an American trade, and it always has been. And I think trying to it's very convenient to just blame Israel all of a sudden, and they should be blamed because they share half of the blame. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm the first one who's going to be.
United States has nothing to do with Israel's decision to level villages in Lebanon. That's not the U.S. deep state doesn't care about villages in Lebanon. That is something Israel is choosing to do all on its own. So Israel is committing acts that U.S. deep state isn't making them do that can be called reprehensible.
Critical of Israel, and I've been more critical of Israel than 99% of journalists in the Anglosphere. But I'm not going to forget what the US and the UK, by the way, did in Iraq and all of these wars and like hundreds of years of imperialism. That doesn't just magically get reset. And I think if
Iran is the last country in the Middle East that isn't dollarized. You either have all these countries, US puppet states, that have their currencies pegged to the dollar, or you have places like Syria that was overthrown by ISIS or former ISIS that we backed. We have Iraq that we invaded that uses the dollar. You have all these Libya, Somalia, all these countries we helped destroy, Yemen. It's the last country that does not use the United States dollar at all, and the last place that can be dollarized in the Middle East. And so the United States is going after it. Like I said before, United States, it just has a one-track mind. Dollarize, dominate every place in the world. And if it's a place that they go after easier targets first, like Syria, once there's no easy targets, they turn to Iran and Russia. And I think in those two cases, they're going to fail.
We allow people, even academics and intellectuals, to kind of offload that blame. I mean, you'd be doing a huge disservice, first of all, to everyone's collective memory of the victims, and also to people's intelligence. And this idea that, for example, the Israelis they have spies in the US, and so do you think MI6 right now don't have spies in the White House? That's how intelligence agencies operate. They also have, I guarantee you, they have their own blackmail rings and equivalents of the Epstein stuff. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's nothing unique about that. Like, I'm sure it's got its own unique characteristics in terms of its story.
If you look at the facts and the history, Israel is a lot more aggressive in its spying attempts against America than any other power.
Etc. And it is evil. Like, I'm not trying to minimize that.
Like stealing our nuclear secrets. Any other nation that has stolen our nuclear secrets? Can you mention? No, didn't think so. Only Israel did that.
But I'm trying to explain that this is how all intelligence agencies operate. It's not just Israel. The Americans are also spying on Israel and collecting dirt. And, we're doing it to the Americans. The French are doing it to us. Everyone is doing it to everyone. That is the nature of this game in terms of intelligence agencies and what they really do, right? It's not just about gathering.
And again, no other nation has stolen our nuclear secrets, so there's only one Israel. It behaves differently from all the others.
Information. They are basically, they are masters in the art of blackmail. We should remember that. And so my point is just that you follow the money trail as well. The investigation I did in the last couple of weeks. It really
this is the interesting part.
Underscores what Nasrallah said, because he didn't just say Israel is a project of the West. He specifically mentioned the military-industrial complex and big oil and basically Wall Street. And really, you look at the money that Congress give Israel every year, it's $3.6 billion. I think that it expires this year, so it's probably going to be a new package for another decade, but it gets approved yearly. And you compare that $3.6 billion a year to the trillions of dollars that Chevron, a US company, are just about to unlock now in the Mediterranean, thanks to the fact that they toppled the government in Syria, they finished the genocide in Gaza, and that's actually why they want to finish off Hezbollah and Iran now, so they can take that gas out of the Levantine Basin with no one interrupting them. They want to do it in peace, quote unquote, right? And again, we're talking about a wealth of trillions of dollars if you take into consideration not just the Levantine Basin, but what is in the Mediterranean with Libya, also a victim of American regime change, and then also what Cyprus and Greece have. That gas you could have extracted.
All this, like Libya, and Libya isn't part of Greater Israel, but Israel's right there, and it definitely was involved in overthrowing the government there, Gaddafi. Israel is a tool of the United States deep state.
Did it before, but the way that oil and gas companies operate is they want to minimize costs as much as possible, right? They're actually real cheapskates. So for them, it was only worth doing deals with Cyprus and Israel for that Poseidon pipeline, which is going to be basically symmetrical to Nord Stream. Once they had guaranteed that they could take the gas in Syria, Gaza, and it's looking like they're going to force or impose some kind of normalization in Lebanon, which really, I mean, a few years ago, this would have caused a scandal to even mention that, and the fact that we are like moving in that direction is insane. But yeah, it's the money. Just follow the money. It's American corporations giving the weapons. They are making the most money from these deals, and you look at these gas deals, even with Israel, like between Israel and the U.S., it's the U.S. taking the lion's share of these resources. Like there's no the numbers don't lie. There's no debate to be had. They are taking the lion's share in all of these agreements. And of course, Venezuela is happening during the investigation. I mean, everyone was focusing on Venezuela because that was causing those headlines, but no one was focusing on these gas deals I just mentioned in Syria, right? And I find it...
Yeah, it's Syria. There's a reason the CIA sponsored ISIS in Syria and genocided 1 million Christians and to topple the country. We were after their gas and oil.
Telling that, can't have elections in Syria, but can pass on the resources to Chevron. That's the order of priorities, apparently.
Yeah.
Democracy can wait, but, selling off the country's resources, that can happen right now.
Yeah.
It goes to show you what this was really about. And it goes to show you
Yeah, it was about looting Syria. So democracy is never a priority.
that there's no such thing as
Yeah, Assad bad. You remember that? It's been a while now since we hear about Assad bad because they've toppled the government and they have no need to vilify him anymore. But it was never about installing democracy in Syria. It was about getting the oil and gas. And 1 million Christians were just collateral damage from sponsoring ISIS.
Al-Qaeda and, we don't negotiate with terrorists. If you give them the gas, they will, they'll be buddy-buddy with you forever. So, that hasn't changed. And the people running the show, and I'm talking about whether you zoom out to a macro level or on a micro level, it's Wall Street. It's always been Wall Street. And the people like Nasrallah that I mentioned who have no reason whatsoever to mislead anyone about this, who have fought their whole lives against Israel, are saying it's
the corrupt side of Wall Street,
a Western project. So I think we should take their word for it. I think they were exactly right, and they knew what they were talking about.
Shit. I like this, man. I really enjoyed this. All right, I'm going to start with the Chevron and the gas fields. Can you expand on that?
Yeah.
And how getting rid of Iran. Is Iran in the way? What gas fields? You said trillions of dollars. It's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that no matter how you look at what happened with Qatar and Iran, you can't really say the U.S. didn't know this was going to happen. That's absurd because you have teams of people.
You can. Trump thought it would be over in 3 days. You made U.S., like in general, deep state, no, they knew this was going to happen. But Trump and those around him, the Hexes, and I think they believed it would be over in 3 days, just like Asmongold believed it would be over in 3 days. And that's why this war happened.
People whose only job is to come up with strike packages. Basically, their whole job is just sit down, look at what can be struck in terms of X objectives, and then they go and provide that to the decision makers. And with that, they tell them, we can strike A, B, C, and if we do that, they will respond with X, Y, Z. Okay, this is like standard operating procedure for almost every military on Earth. And, by March 18th, so that's when Israel hit the South Pass gas field and then Iran hit...
Yes, the reason I'm going to disagree here is before Israel hit the gas field, they hit... first weekend was a desalination plant. And then Iran responded and hit a desalination plant in Bahrain. Then next weekend, they hit that oil depot near Tehran, which released those huge amount of smoke that poisoned the air and resulted in toxic rain. They did that, and then Iran responded by attacking oil infrastructure throughout the Gulf. Then the third weekend, they attacked the LNG plant in Iran. Then Iran responded, attacked the LNG plant in Qatar. The point is, it seems like a Trump administration that had no fucking idea what to do. They were stuck in a war they thought would be over in 3 days. So they're throwing darts at the board, hoping something sticks and works out for them. First time was some desalination plant, then an oil depot, then the LNG plant. And each time it was like, oh my God, that didn't work. They hit stuff in the Gulf. So let's not do that again. And so the reason I'm certain it's this rather than what he's suggesting is if the intent was to attack the LNG plant, they would have continued attacking it. It wouldn't have just been a one-time thing and then never attack it again. That seems more like trying a random approach and see if that works and gets the Iranians to negotiate. So, desalination plant has nothing to do with oil, and that was one of the first things that was struck the first weekend.
Yeah, Ras Laffan is basically the same gas field, right? This is the biggest gas field on the planet, and it's shared by Qatar and Iran. So my point is just that if you are the Israeli military and you are the US military and you have all this technology and you have all these brains that are running around the office, 24/7 preparing these strike packages, you cannot seriously expect me to believe they didn't know that Iran was...
Look at Asmongold. Clearly a very smart individual, completely uninformed about the Iran situation. And Trump, because of his distrust of career bureaucrats, has brought in a lot of outsiders that share Asmongold's level of knowledge. Given that scenario, yes, it's very... I could easily believe they didn't fully understand the impact of whatever strike they were authorizing. Maybe the ones setting up the strikes did, but like you said, the strike packages are proposed, and Trump already asked, give me a strike package to target this, and the military complied, even knowing what the result would be, and Trump just decided to execute it without understanding, and that's how it happened.
Was going to hit Rastafan in response. I mean, Iran literally, I went and found the video myself. Like, you remember every day there was these statements from the IRGC spokesperson saying, you know, what they were going to do and issuing these warnings. And already on March 12th, they were saying, look, you hit any of our oil, we will target all the oil.
I told a Zoomer about Building 7 today, that 3 skyscrapers collapsed on 9/11. Was he surprised? Was he shocked? Because, yeah, when you're trying to convince, explain things to people, it's always best to focus on stuff like that. It's easy to understand and shocking. And yeah, don't talk about like nanite dust in thermal nanite in the dust from 9/11. That's not, people don't know what thermal nanite is. But skyscraper collapsing for no reason, that is something even average Joe can wrap their head around. And the fact that they don't know how many skyscrapers actually collapsed on 9/11. The answer is 3, by the way. Yep.
Infrastructure that is run by American companies, and that's literally the case in Rastafan. It's a joint venture between Qatar Energy, or it was, and ExxonMobil, which is a US company. And it's very funny because I'll come back to those 2 companies in a bit, and you'll understand why it's not really a disaster for them. But yeah, they operate that gas field, and so the idea that they just didn't know that Iran would strike that in response, it is absurd. This is the biggest gas field on the planet. You don't just randomly strike it.
Yes, look how the war started. Trump obviously thought it'd be over in 3 days. He had no idea what he was doing when he was vying supreme leader. He didn't fully understand the implications. Why would he fully understand the implications of any other strike package he authorized?
And the attempts that they made to distance the White House from the strike is even more ridiculous. I mean, just on a logistical level, there is no way that you can mount an air attack like that without not just the United States, but everyone next door and in the region finding out. You know, it generates a ton of metadata. You're calling up pilots. You know, you're getting planes refueled, rearmed. You cannot hide these things. This is obscene that you know they expect us to believe the Americans didn't know. Utterly ridiculous. That's the value that Israel provides the US. It's this sort of deflection. It's the fact that Israel is able to absorb the retaliation for the United States, right? So as long as Iran are hitting Tel Aviv instead of Washington, that is a victory. You know, for anyone who understands geopolitics, you can't put a price tag on that, and it's not something that you can show to people. Because it's a negative.
Israel is the U.S. deep state's power projection in the region. And yes, part of that is absorbing some of the blowback, of course. But he's over-exaggerating the importance of that. The United States is on the other side of the world. Even it doesn't need... countries like Iran doesn't have the way to strike the United States anyway. So why does it need Israel to become a target?
Negative, basically. And the thing is that people don't understand that value. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but just from a cold point of view, like from a game theory, strategic point of view, it is invaluable.
No, I would actually now say that today, at least, that dynamic has changed the opposite. Our support of Israel is making us a target from the rest of the world and increasing the danger to U.S. citizens. Our alliance to Israel is not helping absorb the anger. The anger people feel towards destruction in Gaza, what's going on in Lebanon, a lot of it just gets carried over to the United States because they know that Israel is doing this with U.S. support. So it's not serving the purpose you're saying.
Valuable as an asset to have, all of these U.S. wars never really responded to, because Yemen or Hezbollah or Iran are going to direct their fire to Israel for several reasons. It's not because they're unaware of the game. It's just because logistically their reach is also limited. So the point is that provides tons of protection for the US. So they basically led to the destruction of the largest gas field in the world. They didn't just hurt Iran, they also hurt Qatar, who are one of their largest competitors, right? People forget that the US are the #1 exporter of liquefied natural gas on the planet since Ukraine, right? And they're too close.
Except Qatar, when it sells its oil, it puts huge chunk of it into U.S. Treasuries, and funds are deficit. It's definitely the United States deep state. Yeah, U.S. oil companies might benefit, but the deep state definitely is hurt by Qatar going offline, because Qatar is basically our oil. We already own it, basically. Qatar is our puppet. It's run half by our American oil company. Yeah, it hurts to have it destroyed. The one point he's making that is true is maybe it doesn't hurt as much as might be someone might think, because the United States also benefits from U.S. oil companies selling higher priced natural gas from the United States. But that doesn't completely negate the impact of all that sweet cash from going from Qatar to the U.S. Treasury.
Oh, so the two largest competitors after that are Australia and Qatar. So if Ras Laffan is destroyed, that is very, very, very good for anyone.
Then why would Iran, if that's the case, why would Iran retaliate against Ras Laffan if this is what the US wants? Because Iran's trying to retaliate.
US didn't want it. It's U.S. oil companies. One part of the United States might overall have benefit from it, but as a whole, the petrodollars, whenever Qatar sold its oil, a huge chunk of that just stays in the United States in cash, in stock market or in treasuries, and that funds are deficit, and that is a huge boon to the deep state, and the loss of that isn't. The benefit to oil companies in the United States isn't enough to compensate for that loss of cash from Qatar.
Against the US and deter future attacks.
Yeah.
But if Iran knows that attacking Qatar is what the US wants, then it doesn't make any sense for Iran to strike it.
Well, it does, because they can't go and hit Gulf of Mexico or Panama Canal. I mean, if you ask me,
but they could strike American bases, or they strike Israel.
And it makes sense. Just add to it makes sense because Qatar. It definitely hurts Qatar to hit the gas fields in Qatar, and Qatar is supporting the operations against Iran. U.S. is using its airspace, its air bases there. It's using its airspace, its air bases there. Qatar is a participant to the war. Attack Qatar's LNG plant, and then you put pressure on Qatar to break from the United States, to not get hit again, to forbid the United States from using its airspace. So it definitely makes sense for Iran to target Qatar's LNG plant, even if U.S. oil companies might benefit.
Israel, they can strike something that the U.S. does not want them to strike, not strike something the U.S. wants them to strike.
No, they were striking everything, and the thing is, it's not that they necessarily wanted them to strike it publicly, but let's put it this way: like, it wouldn't be so bad if they did. Do you understand the implication here? Is that it's kind of like
benefit analysis. The cost is not as high as people think.
Yes, this I agree. For United States oil companies, and yes, the loss of the cash from Qatar to the stock market and treasury market, it hurts, but there is something extra profits to U.S. oil companies compensate for that to a big extent. So it's less bad than people think. However, for Qatar, it's just terrible, and it does put pressure on the country to break with the United States, which is what Iran wants.
Exactly, yeah, and it's just like Nord Stream. It's we didn't do it, but we led to the war that did it, and we made sure that it was allowed to logistically happen. And now American companies are profiting. They're not going to come out and say we did it. It was us, hi, Chevron. So I'm just trying to explain that. Logistically speaking, there was no way Americans wouldn't have expected this, and Iran were sort of. It's not that they were, doing this to oblige the Americans in any way or doing them a favor. They literally said, "Look, you hit our gas fields, our oil wells, we're hitting yours in response, right?" And they didn't just limit it to Ras Laffan; they hit facilities all across the region. Like, I mapped it myself, and it was very exhausting. So they were hitting an aviation fuel depot in an American base in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia. They were hitting a lot of targets, right? Like Ras Laffan was maybe the biggest in terms of significance, but they had no choice. They had no choice. I mean,
again, it wasn't a mistake. Attacking the targets they did in the Gulf was to Iran's advantage. It put pressure on those Gulf countries to break with the United States, and overall, it was a net negative to the United States for Qatar's LNG plant to be hit, even if it wasn't as big a negative as some people might think.
It should really, an eye for an eye should really mean that if Iran's gas and oil facilities are struck, America's are struck in America. That's really an eye for an eye. But we can't expect the Iranians to escalate to that level because
No, every country responsible for attacking Iran, all of their oil facilities should be struck if we're talking an eye for an eye. Qatar is involved, so yes, the LNG plant in Qatar should be struck. What he is right in one respect is that an LNG plant in the United States should also have been struck if you were truly going for an eye for an eye. But they can't reach the United States, so they're just doing eye for an eye locally.
By someone, but I was informed, not but, I was informed by someone that Iran struck the Chevron, is it Chevron? Chevron assets within Ras Laffan. Chevron or the other company, Exxon. One of them, Exxon or Chevron's assets within Ras Laffan. So not the Qatari state-owned company's assets, but the American assets within Ras Laffan. It's a very precise strike. Not sure if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, their trains, I think it was 4, 6, and I'm forgetting the other number, but basically, it's a joint venture. So
You went deep into this, Richard. You went deep.
Yeah, I did. No, 'cause I like literally every map, even I made myself because I wanted it to be airtight. And the thing is that if you want, I can frame it a different way. If you look at March 4th, that's like the first week of the war. Qatar Energy were already declaring a force majeure, basically saying that there's a war on, and we relinquish we abdicate our responsibility to fulfill these contracts. So just like on a macro level, the US caused that disruption, which is good for US companies. Okay, just on that level. And this is what people don't understand, is that this whole war the whole point is to constrict the supply of oil and gas. The Americans want this because they are self-sufficient and they are the ones that are going to profit now from that low supply.
I actually looked into it. United States is barely self-sufficient, and is hugely vulnerable to the price of oil going up, because we export light crude and we import heavy crude, because that's what our refineries need. And so gas prices are going to go up because of Iran, and that's very bad for the American consumer and for President Trump. It's true that if you're just looking at it solely from the perspective of U.S. energy companies, then he might be right that this is good for any energy producer anywhere in the world, this Iran crisis. And if you think that United States equals U.S. energy companies, then maybe I understand his perspective. The takeaway you should really take from that is that one section of America's economy, oil producers or energy companies, are benefiting from this Iran war, and they are a lobbying group, and they probably had a big influence on getting this war started. That much is true. But the United States is more than just oil and gas interests, and this Iran crisis is more than just done for U.S. energy companies. It's also done for Israel, for the Zionists, that they do have their own interests in this, and Trump was tricked into it. If he had understood what he was getting into, he never would have gotten into it. Anyway, I think that's enough for this video. We went over the salient points. This will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye.